Today we have 7 tips for Hyper Roll, which is a new game mode from TFT, and if tip number 3 doesn't at least make you smile, I'm not quite sure what will. So in case you guys didn't know, TFT launched a new game mode called Hyper Roll, and it's part of the TFT Labs section, which is what I'm gonna guess is gonna be a new game mode every single set. And ever since I started playing it, I've been completely hooked. I played like a ton of games on it actually, like probably more than like the regular games. And I think it's actually like one of the best ways to learn the game for 2 types of people. So first, completely new players can get a lot of benefit from playing Hyper Roll because they don't have to worry about leveling, and a lot of the rule set is simplified. Another type of player it could benefit are players who are returning to TFT, because Hyper Roll is super useful in learning all the new traits and champions, because again, you don't have to worry about too many game mechanics like in the regular game. Before we get into that, I want to talk briefly about all the stages and rounds in Hyper Roll, because there isn't that much information out there unless you play a game and like write it down. So to save you guys time, I'm going to do that for you. So the big difference right as you enter a game is that you'll notice the rounds and stages, they're all different. And since you can't level up, your level corresponds to whatever stage it is. So for example, if it is stage 5, you are going to be level 5. And here is a rundown of all the different rounds in Hyper Roll. So starting in stage 1, we have the beginning carousel. It starts off the same exact way as normal TFT, but you may notice that there's one neutral round during this stage. Next up for stage 2 consists of only one neutral round. Once you get to stage 3, PvP starts, and in stage 3, this is where you will face 2 opponents. Next stage is stage 4, and you start off with an armory, and so far all armories in Hyper Roll may include shadow items, and this isn't the case in the regular game mode, in case you guys didn't know, and you'll also have 2 player versus player rounds. Stage 5, you have the Krugs and 1 PvP round, and then stage 6, you have Wolves, 2 armories, and 2 PvP rounds. So stage 6 is a pretty pivotal moment because you get a ton of items, and that's where you'll most likely find a direction for your composition. Stage 7 is Raptors, then an armory with 2 PvP rounds, and then stage 8, you have a dragon, 2 PvP rounds, and then once you hit level 9 or stage 9, which is the last stage, you fight the Rift Herald first, and then you have 5 straight PvP rounds. And there's no round after that because everyone should be dead by then. So now we're gonna get into all the tips. If you guys have liked what you guys have been seeing so far, go ahead and like and subscribe below. And let me know whether you guys are playing more ranked mode or more Hyper Roll mode down in the comments below after you guys finish the video. So tip number 1, you can only lose a set amount of HP each round. So again, contrary to the regular game mode, you cannot lose more than a certain amount of health each round. The way to see how much health you'll lose is by looking at the red number at the top of your screen. The damage you take in each round is as follows. So in stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, you can only lose 2 life after every round if you lose. And then in stage 5, 6, and 7, you'll lose 4 life if you lose a round. And in stage 8 and 9, so for the rest of the game, you could only lose 6 life for those rounds. So you guys might be wondering, like, why is this important? How do we take advantage of this rule set? So that brings us on to tip number 2, which is always count the number of lives you have and play around that. So since player damage is flat, you can essentially count to see how many more rounds you can go if you lost everything. So if you have 6 HP or less, you only have 1 life because 1 loss means you are out of the game. If you have 7 to 12, that means you have 2 lives. So now that we know that, let's assume you are starting stage 8 right away and there are 2 PvP rounds during this stage. If you are at 14 health, you can consider not rolling at all and lose these next 2 rounds on purpose, and instead roll on level 9 after you hit it to get a higher chance of hitting all the legendary units for your team. This should give your late game team comp much more strength because you roll down your gold more efficiently than some other players. Now I'm not saying to always do this, but it's something you can consider. On the contrary, if you are in the same exact spot as before, stage 8 just began and you have 2 PvP rounds left and you have 12 or less life, you could potentially just lose both rounds and just get knocked out of the game. And you won't even ever reach level 9 if that's the case. So if that is you, you should probably consider rolling if your team is weak and not strong enough to advance you to level 9. So now that we know how life totals work, let's go into tip number 3, which I think is pretty funny. So did you guys know Teemo costs only 1 life in this game mode instead of 6 like he does in the regular game mode? So since he only costs 1 life, we could take advantage of that fact to get pretty much free gold. Because if you sell Teemo, you get 5 gold back. So how this works is that you could buy Teemo for 1 life and then sell him for 5 gold. But there are ways to do this so that you don't actually lose any life. So following up on the last tip, since round damage is flat, there is no difference between having 6 HP and 5 HP because you still only have 1 life at that point in the game. So if you are at 6 health, you could buy Teemo, drop down to 5 health, and then sell him for 5 gold and just gain 5 gold out of nowhere. You could do this 4 more times, dropping you all the way down to 1 health because again, 1 health is the same as having 6 health in the late game. So all in all, if you utilize this trick, you'll end up trading health for gold, but you don't actually lose any health in the grand scheme of the game. Now that we're done with talking about life totals, let's go on to tip number 4, which is about rolling. So the name of the game is Hyper Roll, and it already implies that you want to roll pretty often and in large amounts. So this is in contrast to regular TFT, where we save our gold to reach a certain level and then roll everything down all at once. You don't do that in Hyper Roll. So instead in Hyper Roll, I actually recommend rolling at least a little bit of gold every single stage, because 1, there's no incentive for losing, and we'll get into this later, and 2, you just want to make sure your team is as strong as possible at all times, because there's also no interest gold, which means that saving gold doesn't actually give you that much of a benefit in this type of game mode. So if you have at least 3 or 4 things that you are looking for to improve your team in Hyper Roll, such as you have 2 pairs on your bench and an additional unit you are looking for that you don't have yet, that would make 3 things you are looking for. I actually suggest rolling at least a little bit. A little bit could be anywhere from using like 2 gold to 10 gold to try to find this unit, and you could even go all the way up to 20 if you're really that desperate. Again, you only have 20 life in this game mode, and the games go by really quick. So games usually last about 15 to 20 minutes, so this means you need to be strong at most points in the game. Now for tip number 5, you want to be rolling during the neutral rounds. So one tactic that has been gaining popularity in ranked TFT is, again, rolling during neutrals. However, in ranked TFT, this tactic, while practical, is theoretically very suboptimal. And that's because, again, you gain interest when you play in the regular game mode. If you roll on the neutral rounds, that means you lose interest because you just have less gold than you would have if you just waited a turn to roll. However, in Hyper Roll, this is not the case because there's no interest, so it's actually optimal to roll during the neutral rounds because that's right as you hit a new level. So that means you just improve your odds to get better units, so you should just roll as much as you can during that round for that particular stage. Doing so can potentially actually steal units from your opponents because TFT has a shared pool of champions. Also, since again there's no interest, you don't actually lose anything from rolling on neutral rounds when you are playing Hyper Roll. So now on to tip number 6. Again, this is contrary to regular TFT. There's no reward for losing, and there's no win streak or lose streaks. In addition to this, there's also only 1 carousel in the beginning of the game, and typically in regular TFT, carousels are often a comeback mechanic because it helps the players who have the lowest life because they get to have the first pick on the carousel. And since this mechanic does not exist in Hyper Roll apart from the start of the game, it means that there is absolutely no reward for losing, and the only reward from winning is having more health than the other person. This means you should never ever purposely lose unless they drastically change the rule set of Hyper Roll. Now for my last tip, tip number 7, always have a full bench. So the reason why you want to do this specifically in Hyper Roll is because, again, you don't have interest, so you could take advantage of spending all your gold and not worry about anything. So therefore, it is optimal to always have a full bench with as many units as possible. This is especially important in the early game because an upgraded 2-star unit, even if it has no synergies with your team composition, is often going to be stronger in the stage 2 and 3 fights. Because again, an upgraded unit, a 2-star unit, is just going to outclass 1-star units no matter what synergies they have. I'm not saying this is always the case, but this is generally the case. So there you have it. Those were my 7 tips for Hyper Roll. And whenever a new game mode comes out, you will need to adjust your playstyle or play for the new rule set. And the major rule changes in Hyper Roll is there's no leveling, there's no streaking, there's a set amount of health you can lose for every turn. And hopefully these tips help you overcome that and help you in your gameplay. So with that in mind, let me know if you guys have any tips on Hyper Roll that you found helpful that weren't mentioned here, as this is by no means a comprehensive list. And again, if you guys enjoyed this, I would appreciate it if you guys hit the like button down below, as that helps me in the YouTube game, and subscribe if you haven't already. But apart from that, I will see you guys later. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.